Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Real Estate 360 Live. For those of you unfamiliar with our podcast, we do a weekly program. We actually talk about, all of the national media and in relation to real estate, to mortgage interest rates, anything that can affect you and your real estate decisions we cover here. If you haven't already done so, I would suggest that you get over to the iTunes store where you can download our podcast, search in the search button there for Real Estate 360, and you can download our podcast that we do weekly to your iPhone, iPad, or MP3 device. If you don't want to do that and you just want to stream it directly from the website, you can go to realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. You can stream all of our past shows on there. I've really enjoyed people, when you go to that site on the right-hand side, there's an Ask a Question button. Really enjoyed reading the questions from many of our listeners. Like I said, I think it's very informative because typically the questions that one person has, there's typically hundreds that have the same question. And I really think that it's good for us to be able to dive into those questions and bring some some light to what you guys are thinking out there. Joining me on our panel, as he does every week, is Louis Camerosano, who is a former school teacher and a former attorney and a former general manager of a major real estate portal. He's been cited in the media as a real estate industry expert in many publications: Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Smart Money, Fox Business, MSN, and numerous others. Louis, how you doing today?
Doing grand, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. So obviously last week we had a lot transpire, so we have a lot to kind of dive into. We had obviously Obama giving the State of the Union address. We had the Fed meeting, which they decided to taper another $10 billion. We've had existing home sales come in worse than expected. We've got international fears and panic setting in the emerging markets, which is all too funny because it's just perfect timing. More or less what we always talk about when we should be talking about one thing, we find ourselves talking about something else. It takes all the focus off of the matter at hand, or should be the matters at hand. So I really want to dive into that deeper. I do want to bring up people. We'll get to some more of our listeners' questions at the end of the show. We'll also talk about a personal loan hack to get your credit score higher. So you guys definitely want to tune in for that. But so first, I want to kind of dive into, obviously, we had the Fed meeting last week, Louis, and so you and I had kind of talked, and you had suggested that, you thought that the Fed would continue its course to continue tapering another $10 billion, which they did. Now, you and I both kind of agreed that it's pretty much Wall Street kind of baked in here what would actually happen if the Fed tapered. They feel like they're going to continue this. The last time they did it, interest rates didn't really move that much. This time they did it, and they didn't move that much. But this time, it's more or less because we have a lot of the international fears from the from the emerging markets. I believe it was Turkey and India are completely pissed off that the Fed's tapering right now because they're saying it's more difficult for them to compete for capital. And on the other side, it's making the Fed look like geniuses, or Bernanke right before he leaves, because they taper for the second time and the rates improve. Mortgage interest rates have now improved for the second time, right? So they're clearly paving the way for continued reduction as long as we keep interest rates where they're at. I mean, it's like the perfect story ending for Bernanke. Would you not agree?
Well, definitely agree, Ryan. What's happened is people are also going to view the dollar as a bit of a safe haven when this happens, because unless the emerging markets, and it looks like they didn't do much good, go ahead and raise their interest rates, the dollar looks like a better place. The emerging markets are partially to blame because they played the whole currency war race to the bottom as the Fed was lowering rates. They were lowering rates. So what do they expect? Now I think Turkey had to raise their rate by over 150% just to keep, competitive. And that still didn't work. So unfortunately, the United States is the main player, and they can kind of manipulate the markets. It's not the tail wagging the dog. It's the master telling the dog what to do here. Well, what's interesting about QE, Ryan, is you mentioned that the rates went down. Okay, well, that begs the whole question. If the purpose of doing QE since day one was to stimulate the economy, get the toxic assets off the bank balance sheet and so on, increase home ownership, so on, it's done none of those things. So basically, if you go through the history of QE, you have the original TARP. If you remember, they pushed through TARP, and the idea there was it was a temporary one-off. We're going against free market principles, as Bush said, George Bush, to save the free market, and we're just going to get these toxic assets off the balance sheet. And that was $700 billion back in 2008. Well, this has been a continuing removal of these toxic assets off the bank's balance sheets because they did QE 1, 2, and 3. So if you add in the $700 billion of the original TARP bailout, this is an ongoing Bailonomics for another $4 trillion with all the QE. And so you asked the question, Ryan, what was the purpose of QE? It was basically to shore up the banks. Who knew that they had $4 trillion worth of these mortgage-backed securities, or maybe $2 trillion because half of the QE was buying U.S. Treasuries, but still, who knew that the banks had this much on their balance sheets that the Fed had to print money to remove? And none of this helped employment. Since they started, the labor participation rate is down. This didn't help housing. Home ownership rate is down since they started this. So basically, as I mentioned, this is a continuation of Bailonomics. And if it didn't, and if now that they're stopping it, interest rates don't go up, then you ask them, why did they have to do it? If all they wanted were low rates and they didn't have to print $4 trillion, the answer is obvious. They were doing it to bail out the banks.
Absolutely.
And maybe now they've purchased, they've gotten all of those mortgage-backed securities off the balance sheet, and they don't have to do it anymore.
Yep. Yeah. It was set up 100% to bail out the banks. Clearly, the only people that have benefited from QE is the big banks and the rich, right?
Clearly.
And it's interesting because, when I kind of go through a lot of the national headlines, so that we can break down things for our show every week, one of the ones that I find truest, as I actually read lately, was, just a basic comment such as sales of $1 million plus homes went through the roof in California. Well, I would expect that. I would expect for $1 million plus homes to be, the home sales to be higher for that because guess what? The rich are going to capitalize on low interest rates, right?
Of course.
That's exactly what they're going to do. So, it's trivial to me how the Fed thinks that, the economy has turned itself around. No, I mean, if you want to put headlines out there that the rich are getting richer, the rich are buying more houses, there's more rich that are flipping properties, there's more rich that are doing, more things with businesses, buying up other businesses. Yes, that's the only thing that holds true and remains steady through this entire QE process.
Right. If that's how you want to measure a housing recovery, that prices went up and that people got richer, sure, then you've had an economic and a housing recovery. Stocks went up too, by the way.
Right, yeah, exactly. So the rich got richer, and now they have more money to throw into the stock market, but the majority of the money in the stock market, as you and I know, Louis, is not the everyday average Joe, right? It's mainly huge hedge funds, and it's the banks. They're taking and investing their money that they're borrowing from the Fed at next to nothing, taking high risks, but also mitigating those risks. They can play both sides of it. They're gonna make arbitrage all the time. We're not seeing like an increase in small businesses start up right now.
No, or employment. And the gall of it is, Ryan, that they've paid themselves, printed money out of thin air, paid themselves, the shareholders of the Fed, $4 trillion, and then tell you with a straight face it's for your benefit, and we're not going to stop doing it until there's more employment.
Right.
Well, they know it doesn't help employment, which means they're not going to stop doing it until they're done bailing out the banks.
So my next question to you, Louis, is, okay, so where we are now today, they've now tapered twice, and you and I both thought that, okay, if they start to taper and they start pulling $10 billion, at some point, interest rates you would think would spike up because there's not going to be private demand for mortgage-backed securities and Treasuries. So
correct.
Now that they've basically proven that QE didn't really have anything to do with this, and now that there's all these international fears and stuff taking place, so what's going to take place as they continue to peel $10 billion, wind it completely down?
Well, hold on, Ryan. I don't see. Remember we talked about last week. First of all, they've tapered in the past, and they always come back for more. We're on QE 4 or 5. I've lost track. But even with the taper, and this is why we predicted last week and last year that they would pull off a $10 billion taper maybe even twice, which they've done, is because even with the $10 billion taper, it's still a $65 billion a month program plus another $10 billion of the interest that they're reinvesting from prior QEs. So it's still a massive amount of injection of liquidity into the marketplace. So you would have to say to yourself, have they really proven that if they slow down QE that rates would go up? No, because they really haven't slowed it down. They're still pouring an enormous amount in. This is greater than, we pointed this out a couple of weeks ago, the amount that they're putting in currently is still greater than QE or bailout 1, 2, and 3 on a monthly basis. So I think what's going to happen next is Yellen is just officially taken over. Her first move will probably be, because there'll be all this turmoil, a wait and see. She'll put the brakes on tapering, which means she's in effect continuing QE 4 or 5, whatever we're on, at $65 billion a month. Yeah.
Okay, so you're on board with basically, now that they've made the move twice, they've stayed consistent, right? They've kind of stuck to their guns and showed consistency. Now is when they can really start to find issues with the economy and the job situations, and they can start to pull back and say, hey, we've made 2 consistent things. We're moving in the right direction. What we're going to do now is we're going to try to, pay attention to housing,
the data,
the employment, and the data that we're given, and that'll help us make the decisions moving forward, which more or less you're feeling that they're just going to potentially have a pause situation where there's nothing really accomplished over the next, 3 to 6 months.
And if you look, Ryan, at the GDP the last quarter, everything looks like, you mentioned earlier, that Bernanke's a genius. They tapered at the right time. It didn't have any adverse impact. Rates actually went down. The fourth quarter GDP looked strong. They're trying to paint the narrative that, and they have credibility. They said they would taper, and they've tapered. Now they set themselves up for, if something wrong happens that's unforeseen, which it clearly is not, that they can go ahead and refire up the printing presses. The fourth quarter GDP was strong, and it was based on, supposedly, the Wall Street Journal reported that consumers and businesses spent freely. But then you look at what happened with Walmart. They just came out. They cut their fourth quarter outlook. They're firing 2,300 people at Sam's. Sears, JCPenney, Best Buy, Amazon all had disappointing fourth quarters. So where was this free consumer spending if the top retail companies didn't do well? So that number is going to be revised down, and then all of a sudden the Fed's going to say, oh, this was unanticipated. The first quarter GDP was lower than expected. Growth didn't accelerate. We had emerging market issues, and that'll give them the reason to slow it down.
Oh, and look, you forgot the best one. It's the cold weather. It's the abnormal cold weather that's caused housing to completely come to a halt. It's the cold weather that have not allowed people to get outside of their homes to go and buy these goods, right?
Ryan, why don't economists have meteorologists on their staff so they know this is going to happen, so they don't have this unexpected weather stuff? It annoys me that when the bad number comes out that's worse than their projections, then they blame the weather as if they didn't live through the period of time from which they made their projections to know that the weather was bad.
Right.
And also, if they want to do future projections, hire a weatherman.
Yep.
It's ridiculous that they use that, and the media spouts it with a straight face that we're supposed to believe it. Everything is fine. We just had a little rain last week.
Yeah.
It stopped raining, so the economy is going to be better.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, the same thing with existing home sales, right? So existing home sales came out and they were down 8.7%.
Unexpected.
Right? Unexpected.
But they knew what the weather was like.
Absolutely. They knew what the weather was like. And you know what? You can say all you want about cold weather. People are going to, if they're willing and able to buy and they can take advantage of low interest rates, they're going to buy regardless of whether it's 10 degrees or 30 degrees.
You don't wake up and say, it's a bright sunny day, I think I'll go buy a house.
And you know exactly why I know that to be true, Louis, is because in the D.C. metro area right now, it's still extremely competitive. We have a very low inventory in many areas, and guess what? All the people are basically buying for the same properties. They're all looking for the same properties. So
and you've had some of the nastiest weather in the last couple of months in Washington, D.C. And also, it's stupid to blame. It's not stupid. It's ludicrous to blame the weather when the South and the West had decent weather during the last quarter. And they had declines worse than the North.
Well, and then what do you think? I'm sure you probably read this, but what was the National Association of Realtors spin on this?
Oh, it was weather. Part of
it was weather, and not just that, but over the course of the year, it was up almost 10% from the levels in 2012, right? 2013, the levels of existing home sales were up compared to the year prior. Well, you know what? I would expect for things to be higher if you continue a low interest rate environment and you have rising home prices.
Correct.
That should naturally take place. You have more people that are able to sell their home now because they might have a positive equity situation versus a negative equity that they had before. And that trend is probably going to continue through this spring. And now that I've seen the impact of the taper of QE, and now we've realized that, the QE was merely just there to bail out the big banks, and now interest rates are not moving, or it's so easy, and how the rest of the world is completely dependent upon what the Fed says and does as well.
Now, Ryan, there's one other thing that maybe we're missing, that this temporary drop in interest rates is really an anomaly, it's temporary, or somehow the Fed is doing something other than QE to keep the interest rates down through derivatives or some type of financial manipulation.
Well,
because you would think they would go up if they pulled, even what they've pulled out of the market already.
And that was my point to you. I was, kind of just, even though we realized that even the money that they've made on these things and they've reinvested, right? When they did the first taper of $10 billion, we basically considered that a net wash. So now you do another $10 billion. Okay, they're really not making a dent. They're still spending a certain amount of buying these securities. But you would still think that we would get some sort of bump in interest rates, at least maybe 0.25%, right? At least something. And for us to actually have a pullback, both times that they've done that, it's a clear sign that, to me, there probably is some manipulation, because it shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be able to get interest rates to go lower when they start to pull back QE, which the whole point of the program is to continue to buy these mortgage-backed securities.
And the reverse happened when they announced the QE3. You would have thought gold and silver would have continued their climb. That's when they started getting smacked down.
Yeah, it's really, and I think that you're onto something there. I do think that there has to be some sort of back-end manipulation. I don't know the extent of it, but it would make sense that as much as the Fed is controlled their every move in the markets and the stock market, why wouldn't they have some sort of plan to keep interest rates low? Because remember, keeping mortgage interest rates low keeps people happy, really, right? Because it allows it keeps people happy. It keeps the media to continue to peddle that, hey, it's a fantastic time to buy. Look at the interest rates. Everything is so great.
And also, if they go up, they can say, well, it's because the economy is improving.
Absolutely. But obviously the Fed knows, as we do, that the employment situation sucks, right?
No two ways about it.
Yeah, they have
no matter what they
that.
say, there's 350,000 initial claims each and every week. And when they go down by 5 or 10,000, they claim it's improving.
And, I would say, so I'm looking at the averages for interest rates right now. We have 30-year fixed at 4.26%. Prior week was 4.33. 15-year fixed is 3.31. Yeah, 15-year fixed is 3.31. Crazy. 5-year ARM, 3.5%.
And you would think, Ryan, that we would be back to at least half of the new homes built and half of the volume of home sales by mortgages. We're not. Even though home sales are slightly up, you take the half of the people who are buying them with cash, and then you say, okay, well, the people that are buying with mortgages, we're at a quarter of the volume of home buying activity by people that go out, working people, get a mortgage, and buy a home. They're not doing it. So you can't call it a housing recovery when new home sales are a quarter of what they were 5-6 years ago, and just existing home sales are really only a quarter of what they were 5-6 years ago when you take into account the people that are buying them through a mortgage.
Yeah. Well, and
you would think with these low rates, they'd be higher, the sales would go through the roof. They don't, and yet they call it a recovery because prices are going up.
Well, I find that there's a very interesting trend that I see taking place in Northern Virginia and D.C. metro area, which is, typically in a very strong economy, Louis, you would think that people would say, you know what, I want to move from this house to a bigger house, right? I want to upgrade. Well, what I'm seeing is actually these people are getting into positive equity situations and saying, okay, let's sell. But you know what? We don't want to buy a bigger house. We actually want to buy a smaller house. We want to cut our debt down.
Right.
Well, what would be the reason for wanting to cut your debt? Either it's a reduction in income, they're worried about the stability of their job. I mean, every day I'm hearing about somebody going from either full-time, getting their hours cut back to part-time, or basically their government contract is just going to run out and expire. They have to search for jobs.
You're dealing also with demographics, because younger people with starting their families wouldn't be looking to cut back. You're probably dealing with a lot of people who are middle-aged, aging baby boomers who are going to cut back. And millennials don't have this issue where, maybe we should buy a bigger house than the one we're in. They're not even in houses. They're in their parents' basements.
They're probably still 2 or 3 years removed from being able to buy a house because they have to have at least 2 years of consistent employment to get the house to begin with.
Correct.
So,
and they have student loan debt, and they either have a part-time job or no job.
Yeah, and, there are, and we always talk about, that it's not looking that great as far as the amount of people that are willing and able. There's still people out there that do qualify. And, and really in the Northern Virginia area, the whole reason why we're getting this huge increase in prices is the inventory is just really, it's lackluster. There's not much out there. And the properties that do come out there that are like turnkey, ready to move in homes, they're gone quick.
They're gone, right.
Yeah, there's 10 and 15 people all looking for the same thing. So naturally that's going to drive prices higher. But at some point, I don't think we can continue. Well, I take that back. If interest rates if interest rates stay where they're at, then we could see another year of 5 to 10% increase in equity if the inventory stays tight. Now,
on low sales, it's just like you can get the unemployment rate down if everybody stops working.
Absolutely.
And is no longer considered in the workforce.
Right, but at some point, Louis, you and I both know that everybody starts to see, oh, look, I got equity, I got money in my house. Now what do I do, right? There will be at some point a flight to let's sell our house. There will be an increase in the amount of inventory at some point. And until we get to that point, we're going to have in Northern Virginia increases in home prices. Now,
right, but there is a wild card in all this, Ryan, and this is one of the predictions I had earlier in the year. A stock market crash and all bets are off.
Yes.
Because then no one is going to buy a house when their equity and their 401k and everything comes down, because this entire recovery is built on this rising home prices and rising stock market. A crash in the stock market just basically wipes out in one trading afternoon all the so-called gains of QE of the last 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about it, this is like, just storybook for the Fed and for Bernanke. He's got the Dow at 15,640, right?
It's good for Obama too, right?
And Obama, yeah. I the other day, I think I was on Facebook and I actually posted something that, it's really less about politics anymore, and it's all about the marketing, right? It's all about the marketing of what's taking place and how it's conveyed to people. Yeah, and how is this being conveyed to people, Louis? 15,640, like somebody's doing something right?
Correct.
Like they've got exactly what they want. The economy is turning the corner. We've got mortgage interest rates that are still at all-time lows. We've got the stock market at all-time highs. Why would we want to ever mess with anything?
Right, and if you're not doing well, you must be a loser, because the economy's doing well, so you don't want to go out and say, oh, the economy's no good, because people say, what are you talking about? Home prices are up, the stock market's up. If you don't have a job, well, what's wrong with you?
Well, yeah, and the State of the Union address turned into, for me, it was almost like a pep rally, right? Like, he's talking about things to me that are really irrelevant. He brought up the fact that you and I had talked about them creating some sort of way to get people's retirement money, right? And creating what they called and he has the term myRA, which that's just another marketing ploy, right? Where they're going to basically essentially get people to buy into a retirement plan that's guaranteed by the federal government.
Right. He said that the reason he was doing it, he contradicted himself, was because poorer people, lower middle class don't have access to the stock market and so on. So he's going to sell them bonds.
Right.
Well, first of all, they can buy. There's nobody stopping anybody from buying bonds. There's no one stopping anybody from opening up an IRA. This is basically laying the groundwork, as we talked about, Ryan, to get into your IRA and to start getting people used to the concept of funding their retirement through buying Treasury bonds because no one else wants to buy them. And ironically, I was thinking about this. Not only do you already have Social Security where you put your money in every week and it just goes away and you'll never see it, is now they want you to put money into Treasury bonds where that money will also go into the black hole, and part of it will supposedly fund your Social Security that you're not going to get. So Why would anybody do it? Well, no one's going to do it. The people that are going to do it are when they're told to do it. And they make you put in a certain amount of money into Treasury bonds.
Exactly, a government-mandated retirement plan, right?
Because why else would he announce it? Like, I thought they would do it under dramatic. They're very clever. They don't wait for a crash and then put in these emergency measures. That's one way of doing it. But the other way of doing it is even more subtle. It's always in the guise of, we're going to help you. We're going to help you save. You see, this is safe. It's guaranteed. Instead of just saying, we need the money. We're broke. Right. So why don't you help us out here?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's just so crazy because and you think about the timing of it, Lewis. Once again, the Fed's starting to pull back and taper, so their purchases of Treasuries are going to start to fall off, right? Who's going to?
Yeah, but this isn't going to replace that. This is so minor.
But they have to start to get creative, don't they? I mean, they
Correct.
have to start coming up with a plan and an alternative to what they've been doing.
Yeah, we talked about this 9 months ago.
Right, and then to take that another step further, so then he wants to increase minimum wage, right? Because
well, he did that, didn't he? By executive order, he's got a pen in his hand, supposedly.
Well, he does. But what the interesting thing is, what do you think is going to happen? These employers, okay, if now all of a sudden they have to pay $10 plus, was it $10.10, right?
Yeah, but wasn't it with the it was government employers, wasn't it?
Right, and then he was actually asking the private sector to join him in doing that.
And
right?
also to hire people that have been out of work, give them priority. That doesn't make any sense.
But,
why would somebody hire somebody who's been out of work 3 years if they're not better qualified than somebody who has a job and is doing a lateral?
But do you even think that to raise minimum wage to $10.10 is actually going to change the poverty levels?
Nope.
Right? It's not. It's not a substantial enough amount of money. Okay, so people have a little bit more money that they can spend at the grocery store on gas, right? It's not like...
Well, people that have jobs but haven't increased their productivity, but it actually keeps the other people out from getting jobs. Because we have an unemployment problem, less than a poverty problem, because if people are impoverished, there's already plans. There's food stamps, and, well, they've cut back on that. That's Walmart, by the way, blamed the results on the November cutback in food stamps. Shows that they're contingent upon it. So whether you give the people food stamps, welfare, or raise the minimum wage, you're still using the government to try to increase someone's economic circumstance. And that doesn't work because you just go to Venezuela, Cuba, or the Soviet Union, and eventually, if you use government as your sole means to improve people's economic well-being, no one has anything.
Yeah. Well, what do you think that the odds that, this entitlement culture continues when we have 55 million people on food stamps? Do you think that really we're going to get anything to change?
No, it's not just because once you're on them, you need them. It becomes self-fulfilling.
Absolutely.
That more people need them, and then fewer people are working, and eventually it just tips into, and then, Romney talked about the 47%. In a few years, it'll be 56, 60, 70%. Because as baby boomers retire, they're not going to be working. And they're going to have their hand out saying, I need my Medicare, I need my Social Security. And then they're going to turn to the millennials and Gen X and say, get to work. And they're going to say, no, I haven't been working for 6 years. What do you expect me to do? I don't have anything.
Right.
So really what they have to do is, well, it's not going to happen because they, meaning the government, are always interested in coming up with more plans, not cutting plans and allowing the free economy to take place. And the other thing is there's no demand for it. People aren't clamoring for the free market. They're claiming the free market has brought us to where we are. Not realizing that it's not the free market that brought us to where we are. It's the crony capitalism. It's the massive government programs, the massive government entitlements, and the massive government bailouts. That's what brought us where we are.
Oh, and it's the fact that they create this mess that with the banks being bailed out, and then on the back side of that is when they come after the government and the regulators come after them to fine them, right? Like they're going to say, to make it look like it's not 100% one-sided. Right?
No, but just it gives more money to the government so they can spend it hiring more people to regulate stuff that they don't regulate.
I agree.
When you pay a fine to the SEC, where does it go? It goes to the SEC. What do they do with that money? Return it to the American citizens? No. They increase their regulatory efforts. They hire more people. It doesn't, and they don't regulate anything more. They don't prevent something from happening.
Well, it's the same thing with any of these quantitative easing plans or anything else. It's like, we're benefiting the American people here, right?
Well, they're benefiting themselves because people who work at these government agencies, either that's a good job to have, it's secure, you probably make six figures in some of these regulatory jobs, but most of them aren't career. They either end up back lobbying or working at the banks or the insurance companies, making even more money. So they keep the money in the system amongst themselves. I always say that when J.P. Morgan pays a fine to the SEC, it should be a related party transaction. I mean, because half the people at the SEC and all these other places have worked or going to work or have aspirations to work at the big banks. So they're keeping them funded. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chase was the first one. Now it's Bank of America, right? They're the ones that are getting ready to pay out. I don't know. I think it was almost like $8.5 billion or something like that.
Yeah, and Holder said we can't go after the Attorney General of the United States because they kind of have us over a barrel because it would cause too much financial shock. So what do? We fine them and we give their executives raises. Well, that's not ironic. I mean, that's not like a joke. That's actually what's happened.
Well,
they fine the banks and they give Jamie Dimon a big raise.
Right. Well, you figure you can pay out a fine of $8.5 billion. You probably just made $17 billion, right?
Correct. So, it's the moral hazard of why not do it. Crime pays.
Yeah.
Because remember, I don't know the ins and outs of what they did, but apparently there were criminal charges and they settled them by paying a fine. Don't you wish you could do that? Go on a crime spree and then come back and say, I got $100 here, take it, and I'm off.
Absolutely. What do you think the odds of an average American getting, brought up on criminal charges? They're screwed, right? Criminal.
I mean, half the people in the jails are there for minor drug offenses, possession, not even selling.
Right.
And you don't think they can just say, here's $50, leave me alone?
Yeah, it's pretty telling. I mean, the way that the rich and big banks. I mean, they're always going to get off on everything. I mean, it's just the way the system is set up.
That's right. The reason it's that way is because banking hasn't always been that way. I mean, banks have always been a threat to liberties because of the way they can control a society. But banks as a percentage of the economy and the GDP, even 40, 50 years ago, were not this great.
Right.
I mean, right now, everything is about the banks, and we've been conditioned to think that ever since the Too Big to Fail, that our entire existence revolves around a healthy banking system. It doesn't revolve around food supply, water. We have droughts. That's more important than banking, is getting water. It's more important that the food supply works. It's more important that we have electricity, heating oil. But they've convinced us that the world stops unless J.P. Morgan exists.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really the shame of it. And that's why you see things like Bitcoin, people trying to do things outside the banking system. That's why that has that attraction. Because otherwise, why would you bother inventing a currency and trading it amongst yourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes 100% sense. There's one way, and I wanted to give the credit tip for this week. One way that you can get back at the banks, obviously higher credit scores allow for you to get loans with lower interest rates. And I think that this credit tip, I think many people are unaware of how much this can really benefit their credit scores. And this credit tip is brought to you by the Credit Pros. So as I've talked earlier, the scoring system weighs around revolving credit cards much more it's more heavily weighted for revolving debt than installment debt. And I would say that the impact of installment debt is negligible when compared to credit card utilization rate, which basically means that it's so much more important to keep your credit card balances at a very low percentage of your high balance or max credit limit. And what they actually recommend, and it's called the personal loan hack for people out there that are trying to get huge increase to credit scores in a short period of time, is first thing, stop using your credit cards and potentially see if you can take out a personal loan, which would be considered installment debt, and pay off your credit cards, which are revolving debt, because so much more of your credit score is weighted on that revolving debt and your proportion of balances to high credit limits. So if you actually took out a personal loan, which is now installment debt, and paid off your credit cards to zero, then you're going to get a huge bump in your credit scores.
Right.
Now,
can you just qualify the difference between the revolving installment debt versus the other type of debt?
Sure. Okay. So installment debt you have, and it's basically, it has some sort of fixed term to it, right?
Okay.
Unlike a credit card is revolving, where it's like almost like an open line of credit where every month it's got to, you know what I mean? It's got to
So a
balance.
car loan is installment and a credit card is revolving.
You got it, right?
And a personal loan that you're talking about taking out would be installment?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So any type of installment loan, it has a term associated with it, which is typical for car loans, right? Car loans, boat loans, and any sort of.
What about a mortgage?
You may take out.
Mortgage
is actually rated as a mortgage, right? So on the credit report, like you have these letters that so a mortgage is rated as an M, right? An installment is
whether it's
rated as
fixed
an I.
or adjustable.
Correct. Now, if you'll see, sometimes HELOCs, they'll rate them as a mortgage because of the way that they're done, but they don't like home equity lines of credit will still get rated as a mortgage for the most part because they don't treat them the same as like a revolving credit card, even though they operate pretty much the same way.
Right.
And then you have installment loans on the credit report, they're rated as an I, as an installment loan, and then all the revolving accounts are rated with an R. So they rate all these accounts, by whatever, letters they assign to them. But the important part to know about this is the more R's you have on your credit report and the more R's, the balances are higher on those things compared to what your high credit limit is, you're getting dinged. I mean, I would venture to say that, probably almost 33% of your score is based upon just on those revolving accounts, which is huge, right?
Right.
So literally, I mean, somebody could go, let's say you have 4, credit cards, and you're able to take out a personal loan and pay off all those credit cards to zero, keep the accounts open. People make the mistake where they go and they close those accounts. Don't do that.
Right.
Pay them off. Pay them off with that personal loan, installment loan. Now, granted, you will have taken out a new loan, so you'll get a slight, bump negatively for doing that, but you're going to see such an increase because now it looks like, wow, look how he's managing all of his revolving debt. He doesn't have any. He's keeping his balances completely low compared to what the high credit limit is there.
And he's paying off his installment loan monthly. He's developing a history of doing that.
Absolutely, right?
Okay.
So this is something that can be done almost immediately, and literally you could do that in 45 days. Your scores could magically pop up maybe from 650 to 700. I mean,
and what are the what's the process of getting that personal loan?
Typically, personal loans are just as simple as going into the bank and asking them for a personal loan. Now, can it be a little bit more difficult to get a personal loan? Yes, because you're going to need decent scores. But the interest rates are typically on personal loans. They're typically cheaper than what a credit card rate would be.
Well, anything's cheaper than a credit card rate.
Absolutely. So that's another byproduct. If you're able to get the personal loan, you're going to get a cheaper interest rate and pay off those credit cards, which is going to benefit you right there. So,
right.
Obviously, the first step is just I would go into probably a local bank or credit union, which are going to be more apt to give those type of loans. If you try to go to, one of the big banks, it's going to be a lot more difficult. And I'm not saying that, this is the end all. But, okay, so let's get creative here. Somebody's trying to buy a house, and their scores, they're not where they need to be, and they want to buy in the next 60 days. Well, I would say seek out, maybe if your parents were willing to give you money for a down payment or something, seek them out, relative, whoever it may be, and see if they're willing to give you money where you could potentially pay down those credit cards.
What if they paid it down directly for you. Then it never hits your bank account.
They could do that. And it would actually be smarter to do that because everything when you're dealing with a loan has got to be traced, right?
Right.
So
this wouldn't be.
This would just be that it got paid off. And then what you need to do, and people make a mistake, so it's going to hit. But remember that the banks only report to the credit bureaus like one time a month, right? So you're going to have to wait probably 45 days. Once they do that, and then that's when you want to go apply for that mortgage so that credit report will be updated. So the lender's only going to essentially look at what's on that credit report. So if you take care of that, now, and then you wait about 45 days, it'll show up there and it won't be on there. Your credit scores will be higher. It'll look like you won't have any revolving debt, so you'll probably qualify for more. These are all things that you can do out in front of actually applying for a mortgage. Now, nobody's going to be out here telling people this stuff, right? This is like, probably high-level credit tips that people, I think that if they did know that, they could put themselves in a position to buy. Literally, I would say probably, I'm not making this number up, but I would think that it's probably anywhere close to 30 to 50% of the people are on the cusp of potentially being able to qualify for a loan, and it may be only 20 or 30 points away from doing so, Louis.
Brian, let's say you do this, and it doesn't look like it improves. Does it happen where you go to your credit, pull your credit report, and it doesn't look like there's any improvement? Do the credit pros then go in and try to clarify that for you with the credit rating agencies?
Yeah, and, typically, it's credit reporting it is, a formulas and everything that they use, and they can pretty much, literally they have, like, simulators. If you do this, then this happens, right? Meaning they can go in there and say, if you change this balance or you pay this balance down from $1,000 to $500, this is the potential impact that it could have on your credit score. And they'll give you a number. Like literally, this could raise your credit score up by 20 points.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually have simulators that they can run that will say, if you make these strategic moves, essentially what you can get your credit score up to.
And you find, as in your experience, that this happens?
All day long. All day long. Do you know when it doesn't happen? Is when the average person tries to figure out how to do it themselves, because it's not just as simple as, just thinking, they could do it. They could do it, but it's much easier if you let a credit repair company fix all the errors that are on your report, find out anything that's reporting negatively and get rid of it. All too often, there's errors on there as far as like what your address is, where you've lived. Why that's important is because sometimes what happens is when somebody goes to pull your credit, if they put in your name and or missing a middle initial or something like that, it might merge somebody else's credit report into your file. That happens all the time, especially for a common name. So it is important, and this is why I always tell people, make sure that you at least check the credit report once a year. Funny story, not really funny, but just the other day, I actually had a coworker who was driving down the road and got 4 phone calls from car dealerships saying that, hey, we see that you're looking to buy a car and that you've applied for a loan. What type of car are you looking at? He was like, what are you talking about? Exactly. Somebody had gotten his Social Security number. They had everything right but his address, but it didn't matter. They still applied for a loan with just the Social Security number and the name.
Right.
This is dangerous stuff, but this is taking place each and every day. Now, what I told him to do was to call up the credit bureaus, and they basically can put a freeze on your credit profile, right? Because it's fraud, and they'll do that to where that's not going to impact your credit score because somebody else is doing that. They have the ability to do that. So you should contact the credit bureaus. There's 3 of them, obviously. You want to contact each of the 3 and let them know what's taking place. But credit scores at the end of the day, Louis, is pretty much the most important thing. If you don't have solid credit scores, you can't even start talking about a mortgage. Right. Regardless of whether you have a stable job or not, right? You could have a stable job and have a 550 credit score, and you're not going to do anything. You can make $1 million. Make $1 million a year and have a 550 credit score, which is probably not happening, but if it was, you wouldn't be able to get a loan. And like I said, simple things to pay attention to is just on your revolving debt. If you do have revolving debt and you can't pay it all the way down, you can't pay it off, let's say your high credit limit is $1,000, keep it to 20 to 30% of whatever your high credit limit is. So don't go over $200 or $300 if you have a $1,000 high credit limit. If you do that, you're keeping your proportions of balances by your high credit limits in the proper positioning, meaning it doesn't look like you're stretching your budget or you're maxing your cards out. If you have a $1,000 limit and you're running it up to $900 every month, it's going to be a negative impact to your credit score, and it could be 30 to 40 points. I mean, I've seen that big a swing, Lewis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen somebody pay off a credit card, which was like maybe a $3,000 balance, and the max was $5,000. I've seen them pay that off, and the next month their credit score was 30 points higher. 30 points. I mean, and it was as simple as one card paying it down.
Well, what about when you get one card, the new card, to pay off? Let's say you have 3 other cards. You can get the deal where you have no interest payments for 18 months. Is that a good deal for lowering your credit score to then pay off those other ones, or are you just swapping one for the other?
Well, okay, so here's the deal. Like, let's say you had 4 cards, but you can somehow get all 4 cards onto one, right? And then you would have 3 revolving cards that all have, basically perfect proportion of balance to the high credit limit, and then the one that's just high. It's better to have that than it is to have all 4.
Even though you owe the same net amount. Even
though you own the same amount, it's going to rate those other accounts positively, and you only have the one that's high.
So then another strategy would be you have 3 credit cards, and they all have, let's say, $1,000 each. It's probably best then to kind of put one in the drawer, pay that one down, and leave that one at 0?
Yes.
So that you have 2 that are outstanding, but one that's pretty clean.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the goal is to get as many of those revolving accounts 0 or low balances as possible. You know what I mean? That in itself, like I said, it's got to be at least a third of the credit scoring system is just on that. And, a lot of the time, that's one of the easiest things that you can actually have. You can make a decision, and it can have a huge impact in literally 30 to 45 days. It's going to bring your scores up the most. I mean, obviously, getting rid of collections and things like that are also important. And that is one of the things that working with the credit pros, you can actually, go in and any erroneous information, or they actually ask collection companies to validate the money that they're coming after you for. Well, it's a pretty arduous process for the creditor to have to have in their files and documentation that they need. Most of the time, collection companies can never provide the necessary paperwork, and which basically makes it so that item comes off the credit report. It's just deleted permanently. They have to, and that's by law. So if you try to do that yourself, good luck. But knowing typically, there's attorneys that work for the credit pros, Lewis, so they write the proper letter that basically says you either provide this documentation or you're going to get sued, right? That's a little bit of a different situation than, hey, take this off because I said I didn't, that's not my bill.
Right, and those credit reporting companies have a cash cow. The last thing they need is just to get their litigation costs up. It's a lot easier just to do what's right and comply with what they're supposed to do.
Well, I don't know if you saw, but there was a guy that just won his lawsuit. I think they paid him out $21 or $22 million. The credit bureaus every year pays out hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits. And guess what, Lewis? They'd rather pay those lawsuits because guess what? They're still able to keep – their job is essentially to keep people's credit scores low. I'm convinced because what does that allow for banks to do? It allows for banks to charge higher interest on those people or not give those people loans.
Right.
So everybody thinks that, these credit bureaus, they get paid by the banks. That's how they make their money.
Well, just like the rating agencies are paid by or chartered by the U.S. government, so that they rate their debt well.
Absolutely, and and that's part of why we give these credit tips. Is I think that it's fantastic. The only way that you can actually get back at the banks, I say get back, but really have an opportunity to get loans, take out mortgages, have low interest rates on credit cards, low interest rates on auto loans, is to take care of your credit score. And understanding the process of how to do that is kind of what, I enjoy helping people. I enjoy helping people and seeing people go from a 550 credit score to a 700 in less than a year. You know what I mean? That to me is awesome because that person now puts themselves in a position financially where, okay, let's just say they don't have really stable employment. At some point, when they are able to take advantage of low interest rates and a stable job, they can get the very best rate possible. There's nothing worse than somebody that's already in dire straits and they've got credit cards, Lewis, that are 18, 19, 20%.
Right.
Those loans, those are never going to get paid off. They're never going to get paid off. And unfortunately, it's going to be very difficult for them to buy into the future. But that all leads back to the whole problem that we have, which is people that are, we're never taught in high school how to manage credit cards. Do you think that anybody knows about how a credit score is derived when they come out of high school? No.
A lot of things they don't know.
Right. I mean,
they're lucky if they know how to read.
Yeah, but the first thing that they'll notice when they go to college is that they'll get credit card offers all over the place, right? And then that's where, I always tell people, especially friends of mine, when they have kids that are growing up, is to take out those authorized user accounts so that you're establishing a credit profile for your son or daughter. That's a great place to start because that's gonna automatically give them the credit history for the account that you have, and you can choose just one of your credit cards. Make sure it's the one that you're keeping your proportion of balances to the right limit, right? But that's a good start for your kid. They don't even have to know that you did that for them. You don't even have to give them the card. You don't have to do anything other than just give the credit, basically the bank or credit union, whoever you're using, give them the information for your kid, and basically it'll be your name, social, address. They'll send you a card in the mail as an authorized user. You can cut up the card, get rid of it, and you start building the profile for your kids. I mean, that should be almost an automatic for anybody, to me. You know what I mean? Because we really don't think about it that way. But you're actually setting your son or daughter up for success a little bit earlier than everybody else because nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing that.
Right.
All these things are just little small tips that you can take advantage of that it's going to put you in a much, much, much better position down the road when you do have a job and you're actually looking to take out loans and credit cards. It shows that you do have some sort of financial responsibility and managing your debt load even when you're young. So I do want to jump into one question that we had as it comes to the end of the show from, let's see, this one was from Scott. And Scott asked, is there a better time to buy than another? I was looking to buy my first home this year and not sure when I should start looking if there's a better time to buy versus like spring versus summer. At this point, Lewis, I would say, and you might agree with me, I mean, if you're willing and able and you have the stable employment, if you have the down payment, if all of those things are in line and you can start looking today, obviously you want to take advantage of the lowest interest rates, and that's what we have right now. Now, you might have an issue in the Northern Virginia area of finding the property that meets your criteria because we have such low inventory, which is most of the time why I tell people they should probably start looking now. It doesn't mean that they have to buy right now, Lewis, but they should start looking so they can get a sense of what's out there, right? They can find out what's out there at what price point, what their mortgage is going to look like, how much are they actually going to have to spend to get what they want. Many of the times it's going to be that you actually can't afford what you want. So you need to have that reality check to say, okay, well, looks like that this is going to be my limitation. But, yeah, I don't really think that it matters summer, spring. That's more of a personal decision for when you want to move. But I think that you should. Remember, you've got to get qualified first. You need to find out what's the max amount that you can qualify for. And then after you find out what's the max amount you can qualify for, then you need to find out what your comfortable payment is. Because those are two different things. That's typically one of the first conversations that I have with any of my clients is that, okay, they're going to tell you that you qualify for $700,000, and then I'm going to tell you that your comfortable payment is probably half of that somewhere. You know what I mean? But that is the place that you need to start, is finding out what your comfortable payment is, then only searching for homes that fit your comfortable payment. Don't make the mistake of trying to overextend yourself, especially on your first home. Don't make it a bad experience. Now, I would say that right now, going into the spring market, Lewis, would you agree that we're probably going to see a pretty decent uptick in actual listings coming to the market?
I think if you look on a good site to look on is Movoto. It shows you, month to month how many homes are on market, and most of the major markets there has been an increase in inventory. Yeah,
I've actually seen a pretty large increase in January and February compared to prior winters, which is telling me that people are trying to take advantage of their equity positions right now. So this trend taking place in the winter, I would expect if that trend holds up, then coming through the spring, we're going to get a much larger increase in inventory.
And if you're ready to buy, it's good to search in January because historically people start looking for homes right after Christmas. The next day is when the traffic spikes for homes for sale. It continues into January, and most of that traffic increase is due to families who made a decision to move that want to get into a place by September so they can qualify to send their kids to the new school. So if you start looking in January, you're looking with everyone else, but if you're willing to buy earlier, there's going to be less competition in the early spring than there is in the summer when a lot of people are looking to close.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that right now, especially with interest rates holding so low, you're not going to hurt yourself whether you start looking, now or the spring or the summer. The only thing that can change between now and then is what the heck takes place with it. Mortgage interest rates, it's anybody's guess.
You can't expect interest rates to go much lower, and if they do, so what? You can refinance.
Exactly.
The best thing is to get that 30-year fixed mortgage, lock yourself in, because we're in for rough times. You're always in for rough times. You can count on rough times over the course of 30 years, no matter what.
But
that's not room and do. But if you lock in now, when in a sense these are great times to have a 30-year mortgage at the low rate, get it. And if you have inflation in the future, you basically can pay off your mortgage very easily.
Absolutely. You take advantage of low interest rates, protect yourself from future inflation at some point, secure your family's, setting a nice foundation for you and your family to have a low.
If you can afford to pay it now, you should be able to afford to pay it in 10 years.
Absolutely. Yep. Agreed. So we're coming up on the end of our hour, Louis. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind telling our listeners that where they can go to check out your weekly blog that you do.
Oh, sure. It's smallgold.com, SMAULGLD, Smallgold. And every week we have at least one blog post on the economy, on gold, silver, real estate, and we also post in the YouTube format the shows that you listen to here. So it's smallgold.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Louis. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Always.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys, if you have any other questions for us, feel free to reach out on the website at realestate360live.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Search Real Estate 360. We'll be back at you next week.